Welcome to Luma Sleep, where stories slow the world down and help you find rest. I'm Luma, your guide tonight. Thanks for being here. Tonight, nothing must be carried forward. The edges of the day can stay scattered where they fell. You do not need to lift them, to mend them, to understand them. Let them rest as loose threads rest at the hem of a dress. If the breath moves quickly, let it wander into softness, not by force, not by holding, but by a quiet release. Feel the chest rise, feel it fall, as the tide does when no one is watching. Shoulders lower, like branches bowing under their own stillness. Hands loosen, palms remembering they were never made to cling so tightly. Around you, furniture waits without urgency. A table keeps its silence. A book closes itself in gentle surrender. Nothing asks of you now. Nothing presses. The air grows tender, wrapping you in a hush that belongs only tonight. You are allowed to pause here, to arrive exactly as you are. No finishing, no striving, only this soft descent into quiet safety. And slowly, the body learns again how to rest. There are words that never found release. They linger quietly, folded at the edges of memory. Not broken, not erased, only kept apart from the world's reach. A letter unsent becomes its own mirror. It holds the reflection of what might have been, but asks nothing of the night. Silence is not emptiness here. It is a presence, subtle and patient, like a book closed softly on a half-read chapter. Some feelings do not need witnesses. They live fully in the act of being written, even if the words never travel further. The unfinished can still be complete in its quiet form. And so we sit with the thought that preservation itself is meaning. Not all truths are meant for voices. Some are folded, tucked away, safe in the darkness, safe in the drawer, safe in the heart. Here they rest, gentle, undemanding, like paper waiting to be touched again. She sat alone, where the night pressed itself gently against the edges of her room. The desk before her bore marks of use, tiny scratches, faded ink stains, a place that had carried her silence for years. A single sheet of paper rested beneath her fingertips. Her touch was not urgent. It lingered as if she needed to remind the page that she was here. Around her, nothing asked for attention. No clock ticked too loudly. No shadow stretched too far. The stillness itself was her companion. She leaned forward, but not to begin. Beginning had never been the hardest part. It was the knowing that what she wrote would never leave this room. She breathed slowly, letting her chest rise and fall in quiet agreement with the hush of the air. The letter waited, not impatient, not demanding. It simply offered itself like a mirror, ready to hold whatever truth her hand would allow. And in that waiting, the girl became visible, not as someone speaking, but as someone seen by the silence itself. Her pen hovered, suspended above the paper, as though the ink itself needed permission to flow. The air carried a faint stillness, not heavy, but deliberate, like the hush that lingers in a chapel long after the prayer ends. Her wrist trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of words unsent. They pressed forward, not as shouts, but as whispers seeking a place to rest. She traced a single line, slow, careful, letting the curve of the letters become its own rhythm, not a message, not a plea, only the presence of thought shaped into ink. Around her, the lamp glowed faintly, casting no urgency, only patience. She paused again, pen lifted, eyes lowered. The half line remained, unfinished, and yet complete in its hesitation. Sometimes, the truest words live inside the pause, where nothing is written and nothing is erased. In that pause, her breath grew steadier. Her body remembered the softness of waiting. Her silence was not empty. It was a page that needed no reply. When the last line reached her, she did not sign her name. Her hand lingered, hovering where it might have been, then drifted away. The page was complete, yet unfinished. It waited in its stillness, a vessel for all the words that had nowhere else to go. She bent the paper slowly, crease by crease, as though each fold was a breath exhaled. The sound was faint, a whisper of paper against itself, soft enough to be mistaken for the hush of the night. She did not seal it. There was no envelope waiting, only the act, the ritual of keeping what was too tender to send. Her fingers lingered on the final fold, holding the letter as one might hold a fragile memory. No one would read it, no one would know, yet the act of folding felt like closure, not of endings, but of safekeeping. She placed it gently atop a small stack of others, each one silent, each one patient, each one carrying a fragment of her unspoken self. And in that moment, she exhaled, not to release, but to remain. She opened the drawer, and the sound was soft, wood sliding against wood, a quiet breath released. Inside, a small stack of folded papers. They did not move. They did not ask. They only waited. Each sheet was worn at the edges, creased where her hands had pressed too firmly, like petals pressed inside forgotten pages. They carried a delicate stillness. Her fingers hovered, not ready to choose. She touched only the surface, lightly tracing the fold as though the paper itself might remember her touch. The room held its breath. No ticking clock, no passing footsteps, only her and the quiet company of what she had left unsaid. Every letter was part of her breathing once, each line a fragment that lived long enough to find a page, but not a destination. She closed the drawer gently, careful not to disturb their resting place. The papers remained unseen, yet they belonged, not as messages lost, but as pieces of herself kept safe in silence. The pen lay beside her, its tip darkened, its weight familiar. She picked it up slowly, turning it once, as if it, too, carried memory. The paper waited, unfolded, silent, like a hand held open. She pressed the nib gently, and a single word appeared. It glimmered in fresh ink, alive for a moment, before sinking into the page's skin. Another line followed, not hurried, not planned. A thought became form, and then another. Yet midway through, her hand stopped. She lifted the pen. The sentence remained unfinished. No crossing out, no correction, just the soft break between what began and what refused to end. She leaned back, eyes half closed. The room did not ask why she had stopped. The letter was already whole, even in fragments. Sometimes a word, written once, was enough to say what she could never send. She placed the pen down, its ink still fresh, its story unfinished, but not undone. On the corner of her desk, a small stack had grown, letters folded, resting one atop another, like breaths layered over time. She placed the newest page gently above the rest. The motion was slow, a gesture of care, as if the paper were fragile skin. Each fold felt like closing a window against the wind, not a rejection, a sheltering. She brushed the edges, straightened the corners, made them align. In that neatness was a kind of devotion, a way of saying these words still mattered. Her gaze lingered. She did not read. She did not unfold. The meaning was already inside her. The paper was only proof that the feeling had once been alive. Around her, the evening deepened. Shadows stretched softly, without hurry. The quiet pressed in, gentle, unthreatening. The stack waited, untouched by time, untouched by need. It was enough that it existed. She leaned back in her chair, hands resting loosely. No resolution followed, only a stillness, like water settling after a stone sinks. The room held her gently, its walls carrying the softness of old paint and quiet hours. She let her gaze wander, not seeking, not searching, only drifting from corner to corner. The stack of letters remained within reach, yet she did not touch them. Her hands rested loosely on her lap, as if they had grown tired of speaking through ink. A faint breeze slipped through the half-open gap of the window frame. It stirred the curtains, not enough to call attention, only enough to remind her that the world continued outside. She breathed slowly, matching her rhythm to the sway of fabric. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a quiet agreement with the air around her. There were no clocks here, no insistence of time, only the hush of evening and the weight of words that had chosen silence. She tilted her head back, eyes half closed, letting the ceiling hold her gaze. It was not escape, not surrender. It was the pause where thought turned into nothing more than stillness. Her eyes lowered, not to the letters, but to the empty space beside them. That absence felt almost heavier than the folded pages themselves. A space left untouched, yet filled with meaning, like a chair no one sits in anymore. She thought of lines that never arrived, not hers, but those that might have been written for her. Messages imagined, never received. Her breath deepened. The thought did not wound, nor did it soothe. It simply lingered, as air does when the window stays closed. She reached out, letting her fingertips rest on the edge of the desk. Not on the paper, not on the pen, only on the wood that had carried both her silence and her confessions. A faint echo stirred inside her, as if the room itself remembered each pause, each unfinished word. She did not push it away. She did not lean closer. She allowed it to remain, soft, unspoken, like a line whispered but never fully formed. Her hands folded together, resting in stillness, not as prayer, not as plea, only as a place to set them down. The room carried a muted gravity, the kind that comes from holding too many memories without ever speaking them aloud. She glanced at the letters, their edges aligned neatly. The sight was neither comfort nor sorrow. It was something quieter, like the hush after music fades. Her shoulders eased, falling into a rhythm that matched the silence. Nothing pressed her to move. Nothing demanded an answer. She closed her eyes briefly, letting darkness soften the outlines of the world. Behind her eyelids, the letters remained, but they lost their shape. They became only presence, a reminder that what was unsent still belonged to her. Opening her eyes again, she looked at the desk as though it were alive, a witness, a keeper of what words had chosen not to travel. The weight of keeping was gentle, but it was weight still, and she carried it without question, the way one carries a shadow. She lifted a letter, its folds softened by the years of keeping, edges curled slightly, bearing the memory of countless touches, of pauses too long to measure. It weighed almost nothing, yet in her hand it carried the weight of what was withheld. She imagined its path, slipped into an envelope, walking down narrow streets, finding the red box that waits for messages to leave. In her mind, it traveled far, to hands it was meant for, to eyes that might have read it. But here, the journey ended. The page belonged only to her drawer, her desk, her quiet refusal. She turned it once, reading the creases as though they were lines on a map that marked a place she had never gone, but always thought of. The air stilled, even the silence seemed to bow to the tenderness of the thought. She laid it back atop the others, aligning corners with deliberate care. Not loss, not regret, only recognition that some paths are meant to remain unwalked. Her hand lingered above the stack, not choosing, not moving, only resting in hesitation. The letters waited, their silence unbroken, their weight unchanged. She thought of words that never touched the air, how they lived only in ink, sheltered from voices, protected from answers. A page unsent is not empty. It becomes its own echo, returning again and again to the one who wrote it. She brushed her thumb against the edge of paper, and for a moment she felt its pulse, the faint rhythm of what had once been alive in her chest. Her breathing slowed. The pause between inhaling and releasing grew longer, like a held note that refused to fade. The room did not question. The night did not press. They allowed her the space to keep what she could not give away. She lowered her hand, placing it gently in her lap, leaving the letters untouched. Keeping them was not restraint, it was care, a way of letting feelings remain without asking them to change their form. A hush lingered in the corners, not empty, not heavy, but tender, like fabric stretched across silence. She leaned back, eyes half closed, and let her shoulders soften into the chair's embrace. On the table before her, the folded letters rested like small sealed doors. No key turned, no hinges moved, yet each one opened inward, inside her, quietly, invisibly. She thought of roads she never walked, words she never offered, and how absence itself could weave a presence. The air was gentle. It did not rush. It did not ask. It simply existed with her, steady as her own heartbeat. Every breath she drew became less an act of will, more a natural surrender, a rhythm finding its home. Her gaze softened until the edges blurred. Nothing demanded clarity, nothing required decision. The unsent letters were not failures, nor regrets. They were companions, waiting with her, holding her secrets without burden, without judgment. And in their company, stillness deepened, not as an ending, but as a place where she could finally rest. Night had thinned into something almost transparent, like fabric worn smooth by years of gentle touch. She remained seated, but the weight of her shoulders began to fall away, layer by layer, as if some unseen hand was loosening knots she had forgotten were there. The folded letters lay quiet, their presence no longer a question, no longer a burden. They were simply paper, creased into small, nearly weightless shapes, yet carrying her silence with dignity. Her gaze softened, unfocused, as though she looked not at the room but through it, towards something wider than walls. Her breathing slowed, like ripples that fade when the pebble has long settled. Each breath became less a motion of effort and more a gesture of trust. The air itself seemed to lean toward her, wrapping the stillness around her arms. around her neck until she belonged entirely to this softened hour. There was no urgency, no decision to make, only the slow dissolving of edges, of thought, of time, of self, into something quieter than even silence. A faint hush lingered between the walls, as though the house itself was learning how to breathe slower. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, fingers curved without tension, no longer clinging to the edges of thought or memory. They seemed to know that nothing more needed to be held tonight. The folded letters on the table were neither forgotten nor remembered. They existed simply as part of the stillness, like shells left on a quiet shore, untouched, unquestioned, complete in their own smallness. Her eyelids grew heavier, yet the heaviness carried no weight, only the sweetness of release. Behind them, shadows of words drifted, half-formed and unspoken, until even those dissolved into softness. The silence deepened, not in emptiness, but in warmth, like a blanket woven from the quiet of countless nights. Everything in the room slowed to her rhythm, the chair, the floor, the air itself, all leaned inward, keeping time with her breath, waiting for nothing but the simple ease of rest arriving. The night deepened, but its deepening felt kind, as if it arrived only to carry her gently forward. Her body leaned back, not from decision, but from quiet surrender, like petals folding when the sun has gone. The room grew softer, edges blurred, colors dimmed, and even the silence felt layered. A silence within silence, each one calmer than the last. She thought of nothing, not the day behind her, nor the hours ahead, only the simple act of resting where she was, in this chair, with these folded papers beside her. Their creases caught the faintest light, but even that light seemed tired, ready to dim, ready to close its eyes. Her breaths lengthened, one, then another, each one a quiet descent, each one less hurried than the one before. Soon it was no longer possible to tell where her breath ended and the stillness began. They became one, a single rhythm, a single hush, leading her deeper into rest. The hour thinned until it felt almost invisible, as though time itself was folding into her quiet. She sat unmoving, but the stillness around her was not empty. It carried warmth, a hush that touched her skin like the gentlest fabric, reminding her that rest was already here. The letters remained beside her, neatly creased. They held their silence with a kind of dignity, not asking to be opened, not asking to be sent, simply existing, like stones settled deep in a stream, content in their place. Her breath slowed further, each inhale faint, each exhale softer than the last. It no longer felt like effort. It was only a rhythm, steady and unbroken, a tide too calm to notice. The room blurred at its edges. Shadows leaned together. Colors faded into one another until even the chair beneath her seemed less like wood and fabric and more like a cradle woven from silence itself. There was nothing left to do, nothing left to choose, only the gentle knowledge that she was safe to let go. Her breathing found a rhythm so delicate it seemed to dissolve into the silence around her. Each exhale drifted outward, joining the hush of the room, while each inhale returned carrying calm, as if the night itself was lending her its steadiness. The folded letters were no longer paper. They were shapes of memory, shadows of words that had lived once in her hands, but no longer needed to travel. They rested quietly, and in their quiet, they gave her permission to rest too. Her eyelids lowered, not from decision, but from gravity's kindness, the soft weight that asks nothing more than to close and release. The chair supported her gently, as though it understood the stillness she had entered. Every surface of the room, walls, table, floor, leaned toward her silence, each one offering its calm without a word. She no longer searched for meaning in the letters or in the night. She belonged only to this moment of ease, where even thought itself slipped away like a tide retreating into endless dark. The quiet gathered fully, filling every corner until there was no separation between her stillness and the night's embrace. Her breath lingered like the last note of a song, stretching gently, never hurried, never broken. The folded letters remained untouched, but they no longer seemed unfinished. They were complete in their silence, complete in their folding, as if they had always been meant to stay exactly as they were. Her body eased deeper into the chair's hold, not heavy, not burdened, only softened, as though she had become another quiet object in the room, belonging to its still rhythm. Beyond her closed eyes, the night continued, but here, in this hush, time had already dissolved. No tomorrow, no yesterday, only this tender pause that asked for nothing. And in that pause, she became almost weightless, like paper carried by an unseen breeze. The breath that followed was softer than the last, a final offering to the silence surrounding her, and the night stayed with her.